Hey everyone, I'm Glenn Greenwald with The Intercept, and as you probably have heard, we published a series of articles this Sunday that have created what is, without exaggeration, a major political earthquake here in Brazil. And given the importance of these revelations, as well as the complexity of them, I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about the most critical aspects of our reporting, the implications of the reporting, and also what the future entails, given that the archive that we're using is one of the biggest archives in the history of journalism. So as many of you know, Brazil, which is the 5th largest country in the world, a country with massive oil reserves and with the single most important environmental resource for the planet's survival, which is the Amazon, is a country that has suffered enormous numbers of different kinds of crises, including political crises. In 2016, they impeached the twice elected president from the Workers' Party, the center-left party, Dilma Rousseff. And then last year in 2018, a figure who has been on the fringes of Brazilian politics for decades, the far-right Congressman Jair Bolsonaro, ascended to power, something which a year before or even 6 months before was unthinkable. So it's a country that is undergoing radical changes and that is of incredible importance far beyond its own borders. But by far the most important event that took place in Brazil was the imprisonment last year of former Brazilian President Lula da Silva. And the reason his imprisonment was so important wasn't just because he's a giant on the world stage in the democratic world. Even though he is that. He was elected as a former labor leader, as somebody who grew up in intense poverty, who was illiterate until the age of 10, who lost a finger working in a factory as a laborer, so the type of person who never wielded power in Brazil. He was twice elected overwhelmingly in 2002 and 2006, and then was term limited out of office in 2010 and left office with an 87% approval rating. Unheard of in any country, any major country in the democratic world, because he lifted millions of people out of poverty, transformed Brazil fundamentally. And so just to put him in prison without anything else is already an extraordinary event. But what made it so much more critical was that Lula had announced, and everybody knew, that he was intending to run for president again in 2018. And all polls showed that he was the overwhelming front runner. He was leading every other candidate, including Bolsonaro, by 10, 15, 20, 25 points. And so when Lula was imprisoned, and then an appellate court very quickly affirmed that conviction with a strange speed in time to make him ineligible to run, it meant that they were removing from the election the political leader that Brazilians wanted to be their next president. So when you remove and bar and render ineligible one of the giants of political history of the 20th century and the person leading the presidential race, obviously that is an earth-shattering political action to take. And the reason Lula was imprisoned is because there has been this 5-year corruption probe that has been sweeping in nature. It has put billionaires and powerful politicians from multiple parties into prison, and it turned into heroes the team of prosecutors, including led by a young prosecutor in his 30s named Delton Delangal, who used his celebrity to write a best-selling book, and especially the judge who oversaw most of the convictions, who became an international celebrity, Sergio Moro. He was named as part of the Time 100 most influential figures, and there was a huge 60 Minutes piece on him. They really became icons, heroes of the noble crusade to fight corruption. And here in Brazil, there was almost no journalistic questioning of them. They used the media. They would leak information all the time about whatever politicians whose reputation they wanted to destroy. They wielded immense power, and they put Lula in prison and removed him from the presidential race. And after a few years, people started questioning what their real motives were. Are they really apolitical, anti-corruption warriors who have no ideology other than fighting corruption and applying the law to everybody equally, which everyone agreed was a noble thing? Or were they really political operatives trying to do what Brazilians have been trying to do unsuccessfully since 2002, but were unable to do democratically, which is destroy the Workers' Party and bring the Brazilian right into power by exploiting and abusing the power of law. And there was no way to know which of those theories was correct because they operated entirely in the dark. They had almost no journalistic investigation. And the archive, the massive archive that our source provided to us, is the first look, the real look inside of the actions of Judge Moro and of the prosecutors who composed the task force that have put so many people into prison, including former President Lula da Silva. And what this archive unquestionably reveals, and even the most virulent and vocal defenders of Judge Moro and of the Lava Jato task force have admitted in the past 3 days since our reporting began, is that serious improprieties have been demonstrated on the part of both Judge Moro and the task force led by Dylan Gall. We published 3 articles in particularly that demonstrated this. The first of which shows exactly what they have spent years denying. They've spent years denying that they have any political preferences, that they have any ideological views, that they care about who wins or loses elections. They've always vehemently insisted that. And yet the first story we published shows exactly the opposite. That internally, in their private chats that we've exclusively obtained, they were talking openly about how their goal was to prevent the Workers' Party from winning the 2018 election. In particular, there was a ban on interviewing Lula during all of 2018 when he was in prison. A judge finally authorized the largest newspaper in Brazil, Folha of São Paulo, to interview him. And on that day, they plotted how to subvert or block or dilute that interview by lying and saying that they couldn't get the security ready in time, or trying to turn it into a press conference hoping that would minimize it, or getting other prisoners to have the right to be interviewed to distract and turn it into a circus. And they said explicitly that their goal was that they were worried that a pre-election interview with Lula would help elect the Workers' Party. And they even said, the chief of the task force said, he was praying that there be no return to power by the Workers' Party. So it showed how much they lied to the public systematically, that exactly the thing that they always denied, that they had a party preference, that they were against the Workers' Party, was in fact exactly what was motivating them. The second story was even graver. It showed that Sergio Moro, who after he condemned and sentenced Lula to prison, which paved the way for Bolsonaro's victory, accepted Bolsonaro's offer to become a super justice minister. And it's called super justice minister because Bolsonaro created this uniquely powerful position specifically to entice Sergio Moro to join his government and lend it credibility. It consolidated unimaginable powers in one person of surveillance, of law enforcement, of investigation. And Sergio Moro accepted it and became part of Bolsonaro's government after he succeeded in removing the principal obstacle to Bolsonaro's power, which was Lula. And what these documents show is that the entire time that Judge Moro was pretending to be a neutral judge, simply listening to the evidence on both sides, the way a judge in the United States and other judges in other countries are required to do, neutrally adjudicate the evidence. He was in fact doing what many people suspected, but which again, both he and Delton vehemently and repeatedly denied in public. Namely, they were collaborating in secret with the prosecutors to design and construct the case and the strategy behind it. So we have months of conversations between Judge Moro on the one hand and Delton, the chief prosecutor, on the other, in which Judge Moro is directing the prosecution on how to build the case, on how to strengthen the case, scolding them when they were making mistakes in his view that made the case weaker. He was designing the very criminal case, not just against Lula, but multiple other criminal defendants, and then walking into court and pretending that he was just a neutral judge, as he said in his speech, with nothing but passive values, no participation of any kind. It not only proves that Judge Moro was a liar, but it puts into serious doubt the validity of the legal judgments he issued, beginning with the criminal conviction of Lula, which the Supreme Court, in light of our revelations, is now scheduled in 2 weeks to revisit. And there are a lot of legal experts who believe that that criminal conviction of Lula will be nullified on the grounds that it was the byproduct of Judge Moro's improprieties. And then the third story we revealed is very similar, showing that internally the task force knew that the case against Lula that they chose to prosecute him on, which was always regarded as a trivial case, lacked any of the evidence necessary not only to convict him, but to justify why the task force itself had the right and the jurisdiction in order to prosecute it. So it showed that they themselves knew that the case that they were telling the public was overwhelming and irrefutable in terms of Lula's guilt was in fact not just dubious, but fundamentally flawed. So this reporting has cast an entire new light on everything that has happened in Brazil of any significance over the last 12 months. It has obviously destroyed the carefully constructed reputation of now Justice Minister Moro, the second most powerful person in Brazil and previously the most respected. His mask has fallen. Everyone has read for themselves the conversations that he had with Deltan, where he collaborated unethically and against all basic notions of fairness in helping the prosecution build a case. They've seen that the task force itself did exactly what they always denied, namely explicitly thought about how to destroy the Workers' Party. And it has led even right-wing newspapers that have long cheered Judge Moro to call for his resignation, to call for Deltan's firing. And because these figures have been so crucial to Brazilian politics over the last 5 years, and because Judge Moro is so central to the legitimacy of the Bolsonaro government, it's hard to imagine revelations more significant than these. We began with 3 stories that we thought were incredibly important. There's still many, many, many stories left to report. We are reporting them systematically and carefully and professionally, the way that we did in the case of Snowden, to make sure that everything that we're reporting is of the highest accuracy, which means that even more light will be shined on the Minister of Justice, Sergio Moro, Deltan Dallagnol, and the rest of the prosecutorial task force that has dominated Brazilian politics for so long. The reason I say the implications of this story go far beyond Brazil is because it's a critical reminder of several important points. Number one, the fact that people who wield great power of law enforcement, of prosecutorial power, of surveillance, of law enforcement investigation, no matter how noble they begin with their intentions, can easily abuse their power if they lack transparency, which is exactly what happened in this case. They became drunk with their own publicity, with their own power, and decided that they were noble enough to break every rule and every law in order to achieve their outcome. It's a reminder to be skeptical of law enforcement agencies and government agencies that operate in the dark, a reminder that every democracy needs. It's also a critical reminder of what a free press really does, which is shine a light on the most powerful factions. A lot of you probably know that Brazil is a country plagued by a lot of political violence. And here in Brazil, we have a team that we've assembled over the last 3 years of overwhelmingly young, incredibly courageous, and highly professional journalists and editors and staff people who have reported this story despite serious risks. They're taking on the most powerful actors in Brazil, including the people most crucial to a highly repressive and threatening government, one led by a person who was part of and has repeatedly praised this country's military dictatorship. So it's again a reminder of how critical transparency is when sources come forward with information that powerful actors have been hiding. The duty of the journalist is to inform the public of what the public has the right to know. And our team here in Brazil has done that with remarkable courage, remarkable professionalism, and has done immense good for their country, which is journalism at its best.